Okay, live. Here we are, guys. Hey, hey, hey. It's Korkonowski, Yankee T News, doing our thing on this Wednesday, better known as Hump Day, August 12th, the year of our Lord 2026. I, from an undisclosed location somewhere in the heart of Yankee territory, better known as Connecticut. That's right, Connecticut Yankee. That be I. So, I'll put out the word. Where are the boys? Where are the boys in this wonderful day? Yeah, I'm going to throw in a little wrinkle here. I've been talking about this book called Wide as the Waters, which the subtitle is The Story of the English Bible and the Revolution it Inspired. So, not to put too fine a point on it, the English Bible was for, wait for it, Protestants, not Catholics. And in retrospect, I would like to add that at the time, the Catholic Church was putting up a fuss about an English translation of the Bible. Some people believe that they were trying to keep control of their flock by not allowing them to read the Bible in English. They had to depend upon others who knew Latin. That may or may not be true, but this book really begins to, it tells the story, and to be blunt, it does not put the Catholic Church in a favorable light, that's for sure. But I'll want to get into that. Meantime, so yes, once again, I've been listening to various sources here. While I'm talking, I'm going to do another quick check here. So I've been listening to good old Tausi TV, and I would say he has a pretty good summary of what's going on. Let's see here. Yeah, it's a back and forth battle. Yes. Yeah, remains blocked. Well, we'll see about that. I'm just going to make this, so just to read the headline here, Strait of Hormuz remains blocked until conditions are met, Iran says. Really? So says Iran. All right. The issue here is that you have, shall we say, two blockades going. You have one, I don't think I have a map here. Maybe I do. Let me just take a quick look if I do. If I have a map of Iran, I want to use it. I want to use it, baby. Nope. I may have taken that down. Yeah, it's not there. Sorry, guys. We will look at the Persian Gulf and how the Strait of Hormuz is this narrowed piece. So on one side, you've got the Persian Gulf. On the other side, you've got the Gulf of Oman. And the way it's split out is that America is dominating in the Gulf of Oman outside the Strait of Hormuz, whereas somehow, in ways that I don't understand, the Iranian Navy, I can't make the air quotes big enough, the Navy, better known as those bug boats, are blockading ships supposedly in the Persian Gulf. Okay, well, there is this other factor you have to keep in mind. It's called air supremacy. The Iranians ain't got none of it, and America's got all of it. Now, the Iranians might be able to fire missiles, but they haven't been very effective. And I'm going to go out on a limb and say either Iran, has had to take a series of, shall we say, tactical steps back. They may have a lot of missiles and drones, but they don't have an infinite number. And they have to gauge what they need to be able to do over a period of several months. So if they start using up their stockpile now, whatever production capabilities they have stashed away in the mountains, like the Zagros Mountains, is not going to be able to keep up with what they need if they're going to mount any kind of an attack. Meantime, there is this other game that the Iranians insist on playing. First, it was, we're going to invade Kuwait. Well, now the talk is about how they're going to invade Bahrain. What? What? You're Iran? You're going to invade 2 countries where you have to do what? Either cross a body of water or take a trip through your friendly neighbor Iraq if you're going to get to Kuwait. I don't think this is going to work very well. And, then there's this other obvious problem. I'm sure the audience is aware of this. When you're staging an invasion, you need to mass troops and equipment in a staging area for invasion. How are you going to do an invasion otherwise? Well, that's what you got to do. And at that point, we'll know what they're going to do. And yes, whatever troops and material they're amassing will be destroyed in that time. And Iran will never have a chance to mount an attack. And by the way, if it's across water, where are you going to get the boats? Where are the ships? Somebody going to help you? I don't think so. Which is a perfect setup for my next point, which I made last night, and I will continue to make on other nights. Put simply, Iran is running out of wiggle room. All right? They don't have the ships. They don't have the airplanes. Their economy is in trouble. Operation Economic Fury continues to nibble away at their economy. They're having problems and they can't get oil out anymore. All right. We are told that we're moving from essentially zero oil exports in Iran in July to effectively zero oil imports in August. Because that's right, the United States is maintaining its brigade. Now, the other part here you got to keep in mind as we're trying to assess this situation is that so we're patrolling the skies, airplanes and drones, constantly on the lookout for any of these Iranian, as I like to call them, bug boats, 50-foot high-powered boats. They can go around 50 knots, and they can be armed, but they don't get very far because we pick them up on radar, through surveillance, by other means. And I don't know, I'm being silly, forgive me, but it would seem that there is a batch of submarines that would be best suited for this situation, and they could help eliminate a number of these boats effectively as well. Because face it, what anti-submarine capabilities does Iran have right now? Zero. Okay. And even if they had them, it'd be pretty primitive, and whoever would bring in the submarines would know how to deal with them. Yes, there was a mention, but we haven't heard anything about it, that Israel has a small submarine navy, and some number of them were being sent to the Persian Gulf. Okay. Well, this gets interesting. Now, I need to remind the audience that submarines are very interesting because they serve a multitude of purposes. Attacking other submarines is one. Sinking ships is another. Surveillance, electronic intelligence, collecting information. And the best one of all, we've seen it in the movies time and time again, launching special operations. That's right. Whatever the Israeli equivalent of the Navy SEALs is, they would be launched in their boats in the middle of the night, somewhere off the coast of the Persian Gulf or the coast of Iran in the Persian Gulf, to carry out operations, and back they would come, having accomplished whatever needs to be done. But we won't be hearing about that stuff for quite some time, I'm afraid. So the submarines have a role to play. And maybe because we aren't saying much about it is because they are effective in this capacity. Meantime, though, you still have the government standing up and making a lot of loud noise about how we're going to invade, how we're going to attack. And by the way, America, if America does not surrender, there will be consequences. Yes, they've actually said that. There becomes a certain air, if I may say it, of unreality when you got these guys in Iran making statements like this. They think they're being clever with respect to their messaging to the world press. But newsflash, we're not stupid. Newsflash, we can see the problem. Now, another part to note here um, is what is going on with the civilian population. Now, on Tausi TV, you did have some clips concerning younger Iranians who are maintaining communication with each other through social media, but they're doing it in ways that help them avoid getting caught. So it becomes this, it's a weird kind of fifth column, if you will, when you look at this. It's, if nothing else, from my point of view, when you have Iranians communicating like this, it puts more strain on the increasingly limited Iranian resources, and it puts the Iranian government in an ever more tricky position. Now, what they've been doing, right, as stories we've heard, has been to shut down shops and things, complaining that they're not obeying the moral code, such as wearing a hijab, and making other allegations against Iranian citizens in order to lord it over them. Yeah, okay. Well, can we just state the obvious here? There's more civilians than there are morality police. Morality police can be as annoying as they like, but you're not going to get to everybody. Sorry. And so you're going to be left with a situation where things that you claim cannot be enforced. And how's that going to make you look? Not good. Not good. So the what was it? I forget what it was. Never mind. It's another group. I guess it's an umbrella group. The Army of, I don't know, the Army of Allah or something. That is another organization that's setting itself up against the existing Iranian regime. So good for them. And I haven't heard much else about them. But the problem I see here is that it's going to take time. You know, it is said, I mean, military strategists point out that this kind of strategy, which is kind of like a siege, but not exactly, ends up being the most costly of all your options. I mean, to think that it's more costly than an actual invasion, well, yeah, because a siege is going to take a longer period of time, right? But at the same time, again, it doesn't help. I'm left to engage in conjecture. To my audience, I am forced to apologize, but this is what I have to do. We don't know. We've talked about Mossad agents on the ground. We've talked about the CIA having its assets on the ground. I've floated the idea that the British might be involved, the SAS, and others, but we don't know. They ain't talking, all right? But if I was sitting here as a military planner, and I'm going to say it, with unlimited resources, you can be damn sure that I'm going to have a group of people working in the shadows, so to speak, recruiting, sabotaging, sending out misinformation, creating diversions, making them waste resources. Let me tell you about I don't know why, I was so fascinated by this simple little science fiction book that I read many years ago. If you look it up, you'll find it. It was called The Wasp. The plot of The Wasp was about two planets warring with each other. And Planet A had an agent, okay? And so they loaded him up with all the little things that he needed, and they sent him to Planet B. And his job was to hide out in a cave and to harass and cause as much trouble as could be caused for the civilization that lived on Planet B. And the logic was very clear. One person doing something to drive the government, if you will, law enforcement on Planet B nuts. And so they would expend a disproportionate amount of resources to find whoever this person is who's causing all these troubles. So one person could cause hundreds of men to waste hundreds of man hours in an effort to find this person. and not find him. So I don't know why I remember this, but one of the things in the book, it described that one of the tricks was that he had this like hydrofluoric acid where you can etch glass. So he had a sheet and he could make a poster. So in other words, there was printing on the poster that had a message. It was obviously to attack the government. And he'd use the hydrofluoric acid to etch on the glass of a building. And then when he was done, he'd go away and there was the message. They would go nuts and they were going to find out who did this, blah, blah, blah. Well, I mean, it is worth noting that this book was written, I think, in the 50s or 60s. And so, you know, even back then we had the idea of a surveillance state, but it really wasn't very well developed. And I guess they would have had a similar thing here. It would have been more interesting if the author had played more on surveillance and came up with countermeasures for a person like our hero who was trying to run interference, so to speak. Okay, so I just described something to you in simple terms from a science fiction novel that easily is a model, a template for what somebody could do in Iran, okay? And it's interesting because they show you these movies, right, of these towns, and they have these huge walls which have these paintings, and murals, and slogans, and pictures of their leaders, and all this cool stuff, right? That is what you call a target-rich environment. I'm not quite sure what you would do with it. Wait, what's this? Eli, what do we know? What we do know is that it's all made up. Yes, I know. There you go again. You really know how to push my buttons, don't you, Eli? The problem I'm having is, okay, well, let's see, what is this? How long has Iran been there in comparison to Israel? Why is that even important? Israel. I think we're drawing a false distinction here if you're going to compare Iran and Israel versus, wait for it, the precursors. That would be the Persians and the Jews, all right? How about how long have the Persians been around and how long have the Jews been around? And in that case, it's about the same amount of time. You know, come on. If you're looking at biblical accounts and everything, if you believe the Bible, oh no, the Bible was made up too. That's right. I'm sorry. The Jews have had aspirations for a very long time to have their own country, Zion, you know, the land that was given to us by God. A lot of talk about that. The talk about it has been around for a long time, while there did exist a government called Persia. Part of the problem, I think, is we have to keep in mind that when you add them up, the Jews have always remained a very tiny minority compared to the rest of the population in the Mideast. Same in Europe, same in America. So the Jews have always been confronted with, I'm going to say it, having to punch above their weight, and that they have done. Okay, let's see here. How long has Iran been there in comparison? Again, so yes, don't worry, I'm friendly, not like the other guy, whoever the other guy is. JK is usually around here. I don't know. JK, you around? Dude, Jimbo. No? Where are you, Jimbo? If you're there. All right. So I think you got to look at the situation on its own merits. And I'm going to go back again to my point. Not that many people, I mean, what? Let's just think about this. All right, I'm going to do the obvious. All right, dear internet, how many Jewish people in the world? I think it's like 15 or 20 million, isn't it? Let's see here. What are they going to tell us? Yes. Oh yeah, the global Jewish population is approximately 15.7 million. Okay, 15.7 million, folks. And they'll remind you that Muslims, maybe a billion. Christians, maybe a billion, maybe a little bit more than a billion. So on the one hand, Christianity owns a deep intellectual debt to Judaism, yes, but Christianity grew like crazy, and for whatever reason, Judaism didn't really get very far, okay? Now, I'm just going to say for the minute, let's just assume that the Holocaust did not happen. You would still have, you could double it. You could double it, and you would say, even in the best of circumstances, the Jewish population in the world would be at 30 million, okay? And it's still a small part of the picture. Okay, so you have this small group with national aspirations, hello Zionism, and then meantime Persia, what is an empire? What were they part of were they part of the Ottoman Empire? Check that. But here you have this huge group, totally dwarfing the Jewish community, right? But what would happen is you would have small Jewish communities in a lot of these countries. Sometimes they're welcome, and sometimes they're not. But you're still in the same place. Judaism is as small a religion as it can be. You know what? In fact, as I think about it, you could probably take any number of what we'll call sects, S-E-C-T-S, sects within any of the other religions, even Hinduism, Buddhism, Shintoism, all right? And they'll have more practitioners than the Jews do. So what are you going to do with that information? I mean, again, this is an effort to put this into perspective. All right, Eli, no idea what to believe, though, because, again, who knows that the source? I know you're doing the research, but it's tough to know. Okay, well, what constitutes knowing? That's a famous philosophical question. You might have heard of it. It's called epistemology. Pretty sure, yeah, epistemology. If you're not familiar with epistemology, that's a branch of philosophy that asks the question, how do you know you know? How do you understand that you understand? All right. And I'm going to complicate this for you. I looked into that stupid paper. I'll be honest, I was absolutely shocked. Am I delusional? What stupid paper is that? Oh, the Greater Israel Project. Yeah, okay. Hey, no, look. Should we be surprised at something like this? I mean, yeah, I was surprised when I first heard about it a few months ago. I had no idea. And we find out that the Greater Israel Project has been around since the late 1800s. And so some guy had drawn a map of what he thought Israel should look like, the Greater Israel Project. And you had all this stuff. Okay, I'm going to be real. 1900, 1910, 1920, 1930, okay? And you had I love the way I'm using this term, indigenous Jewish population in the Near East region, all right, what we think of as Palestine and Jordan and Syria, right? So yes, this seemed to be sort of an area of concentration for the Jewish population, but it wasn't the last word on where you could find Jews. And so they had a strong sense of history, reflected in their Bible, okay, in what we think of as the Old Testament. They have, these other things are escaping me at the moment. Pentateuch is a collection of the books that are in the Old Testament, but it's not the complete collection. And so they rely on this as a guide for saying, this land here is what God gave to us. And yes, so where we find ourselves today, it's all a little unclear, by the way. Let me go back a little bit. I would love to find that other map. So great, you had the Zionists who had their map. Don't forget, there were some people who had their map of the same area. That would have been the British and the French. And am I leaving anybody out? Nah, the Germans weren't there. Let's go with the British and French for now. I understand what you mean, because before I met DJ, I follow a lot of the same political ideals. So these are not political ideals. I'm just talking about history here. Okay. And I don't think the reference to biblical history somehow ends up being political. You know, let's understand. Let me just give you my 10-cent definition of politics here and contrast it with economics. Politics, by definition, separates. It divides, okay? It says, this is mine, that is yours. Here's the borderline. and I'll let you know if you can cross it. That's the essence of what we know of as politics, whether it's political parties or how governments run and whoever runs the politics of that country. That's where you end up. By contrast, economics unifies. Hey, you start a business, you got a product to sell, you want to sell to everybody on the planet. You want to make friends everywhere you go. So, heck, I don't like those trade barriers. I don't like those political borders. I want to be able to sell to anybody. So you can appreciate that politics and economics have a fundamental, incompatible perspective on the world. And then when you get into that funny field that kind of lands in the middle called political economy, well, things really begin to get interesting. And by the way, since I brought it up, political economy is a relatively, well, sort of a new concept. Here, I'm going to do another quick search. Forgive me. When did the concept of political economy first begin? Let's see if we got one for us here. Early 17th century, économie politique from the French in 1615. So the idea is a little bit older than I thought, but it's the understanding that you have this interaction between what appear to be two fundamentally different ideas. Let's see, that's why it's about education, not discrimination. Yes, viewers, whatever that sedate moment, what? Whoever this is, sedate moment. Anyway, yeah, whatever. Okay, so political economy then, it's not clear to me if it started out as an effort to address this apparent conflict between these two very different worldviews, but I would like to point out to the audience that a number of presidents had what were their own private libraries. I personally find this a fascinating subject. Presidents with their own personal libraries, I'm not taking this green screen down if I can help it. You'd see a bit of a library, and that's just the tiniest part. There's all that stuff over there in the other room, and a lot of books. So private libraries, I can relate, I can identify. And Abraham Lincoln had a private library, and in that library, he had a number of books on a subject that fascinated this lawyer. He was a lawyer, remember that. And the subject was political economy. I'd be curious to know what books were written on political economy in the 19th century, because that little reference suggested that the concept first emerged in the 17th century. Okay. So over the course of 200 years, and by the way, since I'm ragging on the subject, ladies and gentlemen, there is something you definitely need to understand, okay? Even though I'm sitting here yammering on, I want to remind you, whatever the great political movement was, whatever the great economic movement was, whatever great, any kind of movement there was, it was always and only preceded by a set of ideas. In other words, them damn intellectuals had a few thoughts that seemed to catch fire with a common man. Well, how could that be? Well, it happened, and it happened a lot. Okay? So that said, when it comes to political philosophy, remember, I started talking about political economy, so there's this thing called political philosophy. We have, for your consideration this evening, a golden age of political philosophy. In other words, before this time, we had the way that Plato and Aristotle thought about politics, and that guided the thinking for many hundreds of years. But then a little something happened at a certain point in time, and that time kept going, and then it ended. In that time was quite literally the golden age of political philosophy. We haven't had any good political philosophers since, roughly speaking, this is going to sound amazing, 1850. I would say the closest thing we've had to a good political philosopher, even though he doesn't fall into that category, might be Nietzsche, maybe. Certainly not Karl Marx. Forget that. So although he would have been sort of the tail end. So at the beginning, I mean, depending upon who you're talking to, the beginning of the golden age of political philosophy, which was in the West and no place else, would have started with either Hume. I think Hume. I'm trying to think of the other guy, his contemporary. There was Hume, this other person I can't think of at the moment, and Locke, John Locke, Second Treatise of Government, which is sort of thought of as a seminal piece of work, the idea of allegiance and what constitutes a government. So he really kicked it off, right? And then you had Montesquieu, you had these others, I'm drawing blanks on other names, but what's it called? Law of Nations, de Vattel. And by the way, the Law of Nations is an incredibly important book for the formation of this nation. And you would be so enriched if you took the time to understand that connection. Maybe I should write an article about this. Make a note. Write it right here, de Vattel. Okay. And now I'm going to really digress. So here I go. Look out. All right, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to confess. And Eli, you're going to have some fun with this. I am. That's right. I am an original birther. Correct. Show me the real birth certificate. Tell me where you came from. What is the truth about this person who uses the name Barack Hussein Obama? I want to know the truth, because we know that the birth certificate is a fraud. All right. But we've let the whole thing go. And by the way, in the middle of this whole debate, which I would say was really hot, okay, around 2012, 2011, it was an open secret. Everybody in Congress understood the issue. They knew that, in fact, Barack Hussein Obama was not a legitimate president, all right? But they were not going to do a damn thing about it, because letting it go by was easier than fixing the mess. All right? That was their attitude. The attitude then, and pretty much the attitude now. And of course, my problem is, if you are a fraudulent president, everything you sign is null and void. Every law, every executive order, nothing. No, it has no legal effect. And we let this go on for, 8 years? Pretty amazing. Well, anyway, that certainly bothered me. In any event, when you had, yes, an intellectual debate about the basis for the arguments over what is a natural born citizen, or what does it mean to be natural born? There's a little semantic thing. It is incorrect to say natural born citizen. It's the term natural born. So to help you out, believe me, the people who didn't want this discussed came up with every dirty trick in the book to confuse, to mislead, to distract, misdirect people around the simple question. And let me frame, I'm digressing. You got me. I'm going to continue with this digression. How do you, this issue of natural born. Okay. In the Constitution, the exact articles escape me, but you have a section that says, in order to be a member of Congress, as a representative or Senate, you need to be a citizen, that's what it says, and to have resided in the United States for, I think it was 7 years. All right. Those were the two requirements to be a member of Congress: a citizen and in the country continuously for 7 years. And mind you, this was concocted at a time when it was a very young country and you still had a lot of people coming. There are some who are native, some who are not. The idea, and I'll get to that point too, where the concept of being an American citizen had not been established until after, I believe, 1782. Might have been later, 1787. I have to check. And then there's the Immigration Act of 1791. That's a whole other subject. Okay. The problem, all right, was 7 years, and you had to be a citizen to be a member of Congress. However, to be president or vice president, you had to be a natural-born citizen. And it says it right there or natural-born. You have to be natural-born, right there in the Constitution, Article 2, something or other, and 14 years, I believe, a continuous resident of the United States. Now, some Weisenheimer wanted to challenge it, but what I wish to submit to you, the audience, is that if one says 7 years and the other says, say, 14 years, the standard for being a president is, wait for it, more stringent, more limiting, narrower. More time in the country, let's just say you're setting a higher standard for what constitutes being a citizen. If it was less time, it would be a lower standard, but it's more, so you have to be more of an American citizen. All right, I don't think there's much of an argument there, but some people will try. Go for it. So it follows then that natural-born citizen is not the same as citizen. They're different terms. They're different concepts. Okay, so are we okay with this so far? I get frustrated because these people, they can't deal with it. I don't know what the problem is. Remember this guy, Dan. Wow, poor guy. His problem was he was born in Germany. And he just couldn't abide the idea that, there's a set of rules where I might not be eligible to be president. Well, sorry, Dan. Yes. All right. So to get to the point, natural-born citizen. By the way, John Jay, the first Supreme Court justice, had written a letter, I believe it was to Washington or Jefferson, in which he argued for the use of this concept, natural-born. Wait a second, natural-born? Where did this come from? I never heard of this. Well, ladies and gentlemen, surprise, surprise, the concept of natural born can be found in its glorious flesh tones in a book by de Vattel, the Swiss French philosopher who wrote a book called The Laws of Nations. A brilliant book and a big book. We have evidence that it was checked out by Benjamin Franklin and I think by George Washington. Okay? But there's a section in the book, believe me, since I was a birther, I followed this with some interest. And yes, there was the language. Now, the problem for some people is you had to translate, because originally in French. So now you had to translate it from the French to English. Now, let me tell you something. I just don't have it in front of me. This is, maybe we'll do a special on this. People have done this. I might do my part. Okay. If you translated the original French from Laws of Nation into English, one of the tricks that you have to refer to is, since both English and French share common Latin roots, is that you go look at the original Latin meaning for these words, like natural and born and parents and of a certain area. To cut to the chase here, there are two things. There's another discussion. I'm not going to go there yet, but you had two things: by blood and by soil. The concept of natural born means that you have to meet the standards for birth by blood, meaning your parents are citizens, and by soil, born on domestic soil, that is America. Now, the being born on American soil part is not too hard to figure out. It's the parentage stuff that gets people really confused. The conclusion is this. Since you have citizen and natural born citizen, okay, citizen can be of two types. Either you're born here and you're a citizen, born in America, or you're a naturalized citizen. And believe me, when you get into the topic of naturalized, it gets really messy. We got all kinds of Supreme Court precedents to mess with your mind. Oh, yes, we do. Okay, but the heart of it is that to be a natural born citizen, your parents have to be citizens, whether they're naturalized or born here themselves. In other words, the concept of natural born citizen means that you're a second generation American. That's the trick. That's the rub. And that's what is not being discussed or considered in this big fight whenever this comes up. Okay, so it's, again, I go back, citizen, natural born citizen. You got two different categories to work with there. So, in other words, first you have to be a citizen to get to natural born citizen. All right, so I think I've made my point here about as clearly as I can. And it has been avoided. And let me just add, by the way, that Democrats hate this. Oh my God, do they hate the concept of natural born? It's in the Constitution, ladies and gentlemen. So the only way that you can change this meaning is through, that's right, constitutional amendment. But these lousy, cheating, low-life, scummy Democrats have no problem trying to get rid of the concept of natural born with various acts of legislation. I cannot count the number of proposed bills that have been put out for the sole purpose of disqualifying, eliminating, rendering meaningless the phrase natural born. And thank God they failed every time, for the very simple fact that these bills were, the first time, unconstitutional. What a radical thought. Anyway, let me see what's going on over here, Eli. And by the way, to answer your question, I think you know by connecting in dots, gaining wisdom over time and not limiting yourself to your perspectives. That's good. Either way, murky waters are crossed. Yeah, even then, look, you may or may not be familiar. I'm changing the subject now. Subject changing alert, beep, 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 beep. Okay. There's another philosopher, his name is Karl Popper, and a British guy. I think he was might have been an empirical philosopher, reasoning from evidence. The guy really put a dent in scientific knowledge when he argued stridently that any given piece of knowledge or information is subject to revision, subject to change at any time. So, for example, the sciences rest on a foundation of constants, like the speed of light is considered a constant. Gravitational attraction is considered a constant. And by constant, they mean that these principles, the speed of light and gravitational attraction, could be the same anywhere in this massive universe. Okay? So, the idea that those could change, that's kind of rad, man. That's really rad. But this is what Karl Popper was suggesting. And the problem is that Karl Popper had a point. So when we're sitting here arguing about what do you know and how do you know it, what constitutes a fact, and whether or not you really have, a body of knowledge you can rely upon, sitting on, I guess, this shoulder here is the ghost of Karl Popper, who's reminding you, just remember, it is in the nature of science to discover new things that can totally alter what you think is true. Have a good day. And yeah, So, I am painfully aware of Karl Popper's hypothesis. And it's interesting, they treat it, our theory. I don't think they treat it as a theory, it may be a hypothesis. I have to check on that. You're just left with everything being kind of tentative and uncertain. Let me throw another one in for you since I'm on a jag or a rag here. There was another philosopher, a mathematician, a logician from the mid 20th century named Kurt, K-U-R-T, not C-O-R-T, K-U-R-T. So he misspelled his name. Gödel, G-O-D-E-L, but Gödel, I'm not quite sure how to pronounce it. But he was able to prove that mathematics is limited. You cannot attain universal truths from mathematics. And that's hard because I know Eric really likes immutability, the idea that things are eternally true. Well, so here's the problem. It's put very simply. The layman's way of grasping this is that you draw a box, and then inside the box you put the sentence, this sentence is false. But it's true that it's false, right? I mean, it can't be false. It's true that it's false. So what you're confronted with is a contradiction. Mathematics does not have the ability to process contradictions. Now, if you take, for example, logic is based upon what's called the law of the excluded middle, right? That is to say, A can equal A, but A cannot equal B. You cannot have A equals B and A not equaling B at the same time. That would be a contradiction. And when you get into the realm of contradiction, the ability of math to function in a useful way ends. It stops. So what am I suggesting here? A mathematics of contradiction? Yeah, I am suggesting that. But what that would look like would not be like what we understand as mathematics. So Gödel said, yep, there's only so much you can do with it. And it was like a 90-page proof or something. And yeah, he made it clear that you cannot do that stuff. All right. So I've made my point here. I've made the point about Vattel laws of nations. And by the way, if you were to, there are some studies where they actually show, I should say this, I hate to say this, fair use. I'm going to invoke the fair use doctrine here for the U.S. Constitution. There are phrases from the U.S. Constitution which are basically lifted out of David Vattel's laws of nations. Okay, so somebody did a study and showed, look, this passage here in the Constitution was from that page in the book. There's several of them. So it's but just to make my point, David Vattel was part of the golden age of political philosophy. And, we were blessed. It was good timing. We were so lucky when the best thinking about politics existed at that time. And that's how the Constitution was crafted, on the back of all that incredible thought. Geniuses of the time from the golden age of political philosophy. And the last great political philosopher would have been, I believe, James Stuart Mill. How do you say his name? Let me just double check here. He wrote a book on liberty. Yeah, John Stuart Mill. Right, John Stuart Mill. And yes, as it says, just to read it here, English philosopher, political economist, politician, civil servant, one of the most influential thinkers in the history of liberalism and social liberalism. Yeah, he wrote a book on liberty. Okay, but he was quite legitimately the last great political philosopher. Everybody after that, not so good. Anyway, I just want to throw in another little tidbit. Now I'm going all over the lot. Forgive me. And then I'll get to DSA. Don't worry. I've got it up there. I'm looking at them. I'm looking at you, DSA. You have to accept that great leaders also tend to have an intellectual side. And I know this is going to come as a shock, but Stalin had a personal library, a big personal library. So there was a book written several years ago about Stalin's library. This would be very interesting to read. So I'm just saying. Okay, now I want to move on to the Democrats, Socialists of America and their worries. Okay, this last round of primary elections around the country were sort of a mixed bag. But what I think what it reflects is that a growing number of people, especially, thankfully, Democrats, who are waking up and realizing, hey, this whole socialist thing, not such a good idea. And part of the problem, ladies and gentlemen, is that Democrat socialism as an intellectual movement, I'm saying it, it's lame. The concept of, all you do is layer on one after another. What's this? Tuck-a-tuck for the Q&A? Tuck-a-tuck for the Q&A? Huh? You're going to have to explain yourself, boy. I don't understand that. Oh, no. Yeah. So with these, there have been a number of cases where these people have been put on the spot to spell out their policies, be more specific and explicit, explain their thinking, and they can't do it. Not worth a damn. Okay, how are you going to expect to, quote, take over a government if you do not even know how to implement your ideas? If you don't even understand exactly what it is you're going to do in order to achieve universal health care, universal basic income, every wackadoodle socialist idea that's come down the pike. And, the other point that's been made here, and this is important too, in my humble opinion, is that the vast majority of people who make up the Democrat Socialists of America represent a very narrow band of American society. That would be white, young, and, believe it or not, affluent. Young, white, college-educated kids who have been snookered and bamboozled by the concepts of socialism. So now they're running around saying, this is the way, this is the answer, this is what we should do, but they don't know what to do. You know what? I'm going to make a confession. I, too, in my 20s, was a rather idealistic young lad. I, too, had some pretty crazy ideas about what we need to do to make the world a better place. And, well, it took a while. So I know that there will be some number of these individuals who will remain stuck on stupid well into their adult years. Maybe some will wake up, but I'm not holding my breath. The bigger problem is that everybody else are the ones who need to wake up and realize that Democrat socialists are like, what was it, the Pied Piper, I guess, singing a song that attracts the kids, taking them out of the town. It has a similar kind of feel. Or I like another image, the image of a boy walking around saying, I've got something in my hand. This is really cool. You want to see what it is? No, not going to show you. No. Here. And he goes over here. No, you want to, hey. And so all of a sudden, everybody's following him. What's in his hand? We don't know what's in his hand. What are you hiding? Come on, let me see what it is. And then finally get to the edge of the town, and he opens his hand, and there's nothing in there. Ha, fooled ya. Well, that's Democrat socialism. Ha, fooled ya. And the Democrat socialism of Europe, I don't know. I think we need a little more analysis here. But you know, and I know, that Europe ain't doing that well compared to the United States. And one of the ways that, look, wait, what do I do with this? There's a lot of talk about reindustrializing America, okay? Believe it or not, so I'll throw this out there as a starting point for this discussion. In America, on average, a person will work about 2,000 hours a year, okay? So that would be, if you go 40 hours a week times 50 weeks a year, so 2 weeks of vacation, you come up with 2,000 hours. In Europe, especially France and Spain, the average is more like 1,500 hours. Okay, well, why should I be surprised if the average income for European workers is relatively less than Americans? And let me pause on that point to make another important statement, because economists are guilty of practicing or engaging in malpractice in terms of BSing you, the people out there, with respect to something called, get ready for it, PPP. What? Yeah, PPP means producer price parity. Remember the old joke? Oh, what's that got to do with the price of eggs in China? Yeah, well, it has a lot to do with it, because the price of eggs in China is not the same as the price of eggs in America. So, because you'll find, if we want to use China as your basic comparison, it could be Europe as well, that the unit cost, if you will, on its own basis, okay, for Europe and China and other countries will be lower than in America. Okay, so if we're trying to say how big these other economies are, if the guys are only putting in 1,500 hours a year, not being that productive, can't have that. So certain economists are going to have to lie with an adjustment factor called PPP, producer price parity. Are you beginning to get the idea? Parity, equality, making them comparable, parity. Baloney. That's what I say, baloney. Because now all of a sudden, what was a $2 trillion economy is now a $4 trillion economy, because you're measuring it now by PPP. PPP, my ass. Okay, so guess what? These economies don't have nearly as much kick as they do. Yet here we are in America, obsessing over the fact that, thanks to Wall Street back in the 80s, they decided we're going to help China out by ripping out half of our industrial base here in America and just carting it off. Just carting it off. There you go. Happy trip, happy trails to China. I remember, let me give you two examples of this since I'm ragging on this. There was a story about a plant in Ohio. I think it was a textile plant. Let's say it was 1990. Everything, okay? This fries me. Everything. Every last bolt, screw, stanchion, okay? Every last piece of manufacturing equipment in that plant was disassembled and carted off to China and reassembled. The whole thing. What a ripoff. That's a ripoff if there ever was one. All right? That's what was done. And multiply that I don't know how many times. I need to take a drink. Second story is even better. Brazil. BMW had what was called an advanced diesel plant, I believe. And the Chinese were interested in setting up their own advanced diesel plant. What a surprise. Look, we've been talking about how China rips off the West. Well, get ready for this one. Oh, but it ends up being kind of the same. But this is what gets me. In the story, I think it was in the Wall Street Journal, you had Chinese engineers whose job was to reverse engineering what was being the technology that was used in an advanced diesel plant. Well, I don't know how you say it in Mandarin. I'm going to go for it. So, guys, what can we do this? Can you reverse engineer this stuff? So, which is Mandarin for beats the fuck out of me. Okay, these guys couldn't figure it out. What a surprise! So, what did they do? Chinese government bought the plant. and disassembled it piece by piece and shipped it off to China. Okay? You know what? I'm going to say it. I'm not detecting a whole lot of innovation there. I'm not detecting a whole lot of planning, R&D, doing all the things that are needed to do in order to develop the capabilities you want to develop in order to commercialize this technology. I'm not seeing a whole lot of that there. I'm just seeing rank thievery. Rank thievery in areas where they don't even know what they're doing. They just steal it. The hell with that. Anyway, I really going off the rails here. Sorry, guys. DSA worries. All right, now I want to finish with the Trump backstory. Okay, so it was in Turkey, and if I understand this correctly, there have been two. All right, first of all, there's been the old Air Force One that had to be replaced. Meantime, there's this similar 747 that was gifted from the Qatari government to Trump, and then I guess it was Boeing or Department of Defense then reworked it to make it up to their standards. Apparently, even that was not good enough. So here comes this story that since they're in Turkey, I'm going to assume I'm bad dog. I'm going to assume that it was the Turkish government, in conjunction with our own intelligence services, that would have shared with President Trump the suggestion that that airplane, when it takes off, was going to be hit with an Iranian missile attack. Apparently, for reasons I don't think we're going to hear about anytime soon, there were some adjustments, shall we say, in the transportation schedule. And what's weird is what we saw. It was like a weird kind of switcheroo thing. We saw certain essential personnel, always around Trump, get on the airplane. We saw President Trump get on the airplane. However, on the other side of the airplane, as we were led to believe, there was a catering truck. I don't know, was that catering truck kind of like a rolling safe house run by the CIA? Does the CIA do catering trucks? Maybe they do. I don't know. So he and maybe a couple of the people who snuck out the other side, but as far as from other angles, whatever they thought was the angle where, say, an attack might come, all they knew was these people got on the airplane and there they were ready to take off. Meantime, the president and some others in the catering truck left the scene, unbeknownst to whoever these presumed assassins were, and were then put onto a military aircraft. And I believe Pete Hegseth supposedly was on this, Defense Department of War Secretary is on there, maybe a couple other people. And that is how they got home instead. Okay, well, so here we have this story about all this amazing stuff that happened with these people, all this, this double swapping and, deceptive acts and, sneaking people around, all this stuff. There was no missile attack, right? We didn't hear about any missile attack. There was a threat of a missile attack. Okay, so I've said this before and I'm going to say it again. Our enemies are perfectly capable.
Hey, Dad.
Hey, Michael. Yes. Okay, so you're ready for tomorrow. Good.
What time do we leave?
8:30. 8:30.
Do you think you could get up early enough to make me an egg sandwich?
Sure. Not a problem. All right. He'll get you all set. Okay. There's Michael going to Hogwarts. Okay. Anyway, I want to suggest that this was a test that I'm going to say it, that America failed. I'm thinking that's the more likely explanation. And why do I say that? We're being spied on all the time, okay? Whether it's Iranian intelligence, Iraqi intelligence, Turkish intelligence, Russian intelligence, they're watching what us Americans do all the time. And you can be sure, especially when the president shows up, it's all hands on deck in terms of collecting intelligence of all kinds, schedules, electronics intelligence, witnesses on the ground collecting information, you name it, you name it. So they have a sense of how America works. And they want to be able to trap that president if they can. So, how about if we run a test, says somebody, maybe an Iranian intelligence. We have our plants in Turkish intelligence, and they can pretend that they're acting in the best interests of America and let them know that we're planning a missile attack on their Air Force One aircraft. Now let's just sit back and see what they do. How do they run around? What kind of activities engage in? Okay, so note to our intelligence services, note to our Secret Service, note to everybody protecting our president. Whatever plan you had that you used, you're going to have to throw it away. Never, ever use it again. Nope. Because our erstwhile enemies in Iran and other places have taken everything that's been reported, all the stuff that they were able to glean, because there would have been offline, I guess I could say, conversations between the plants in Turkish intelligence and Americans that would have been transmitted to Iranian intelligence. So they have a pretty deep understanding of everything that went into running this ruse. I love it. Okay, so what you're left with then is an exercise where they now have collected information on how we roll when it comes to handling an emergency involving the safety of the president. Okay. That kind of, I would think, kind of narrows our options as far as those things are concerned. So they never had any missiles. They weren't going to fire at them. That's what I believe. But it was structured in such a way where a certain, how should I say this? The Iranian intelligence services would have known what buttons to push and how hard to push them in order to elicit the kind of reaction they got from the Americans. I hope you guys figure this stuff out. I mean, we can't have this going on like this, I'm just saying. Anyway, so that's my Trump backstory, and I'm sticking to it. All right. Well, thanks for listening to me, and tell all your friends, and subscribe to Yankee T News at YouTube at Yankee T News, and hit the good old subscribe button there. We're trying to build up our base. We're trying to become a force in news. All right. So thanks a lot for listening again. All right. Later.